I offered to carry her bags. That's what I said. But the truth I still can't quite name is that I just didn't want to stop walking beside her. And nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. That's why I'm still thinking about it. When we arrived where she needed to go, I should have said goodbye and left. I know that. But my feet stayed where they were, and she didn't say anything to make me go. If you've ever stayed in one place longer than you had reason to, you'll understand this story. Subscribe right now, because this channel is for you. And tell me in the comments, where are you hearing this from? There's a quality of light on Saturday mornings in October that I can never quite describe. It's not exactly the sun, it's the way it filters through the yellow leaves on the Brooklyn sidewalks and makes everything seem to be happening slightly slowly. As if the world has woken up but hasn't yet decided to hurry. I had gone out without a plan. That matters. I had no list, no schedule, no one waiting for me anywhere. Just me, the wool coat I grabbed from the chair because it was nearby, and the vague idea that a street fair on Washington Avenue might give me something. I didn't know what. Sometimes we go out like that, searching for something that doesn't yet have a name. The market was full in just the right way. Not crowded, full. With that kind of movement that feels organic, where people stop at the artisanal honey stands and spend 5 minutes chatting with the producers. Where children run between adults' legs without anyone getting annoyed. A band was playing something soft near the entrance guitar in a female voice that I didn't stop to identify, but that stayed with me somehow. I was looking at some herbs at a stall when I felt the space next to me become different. I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't a smell, it wasn't a sound. It was simply a presence. Like when someone enters a room and the air changes temperature to a degree that only the body perceives, not the skin. I didn't look immediately. I kept my fingers near a bunch of dried lavender and thought, don't look. I don't know why I thought that. There was no reason not to look. But it took me about 3 seconds longer than usual before turning my face away. And when I turned around, she was beside me in profile, examining something on a low shelf. Her dark hair was haphazardly tied back. She wore small earrings and a coat that looked like it had seen a lot of wear. Her hands held 2 cloth bags, already quite full, one in one arm, the other balanced on her elbow in a way that was clearly temporary, clearly about to slip. I looked at the bags. She sensed I was looking not at her, but at the bags, and turned her face toward me with an expression that wasn't a plea for help. It was just awareness that someone was watching. I said, I can hold one for you, and she said, it is not necessary. But neither of us moved from our spot. She agreed. Not after much insistence, after a pause. The kind of pause that isn't hesitation, it's assessment. She looked at me for maybe 2 seconds, and then extended the bag from her left arm with a naturalness that surprised me, as if she had decided to trust me without making a big deal out of it. Thanks, she said. And she continued looking at the herbs. I stood beside her, unsure what to do with my body. I had offered to help, but what did help mean now? Walking with her? Standing there? Leaving after a minute with a polite excuse? I stayed. It wasn't exactly a decision. It was more of an absence of a contrary decision. She moved slowly through the market, attentively. She stopped at the stall she wanted to stop at, held fruit, asked about its origin with the kind of care that comes from someone who really cooks, not someone who samples recipes, but someone who cooks. I learned this difference just by watching her for the first 10 minutes. I didn't know her name yet. She didn't know mine. And there was no obvious moment for introductions because the conversation had started in the middle with a gesture, with the outstretched bag, and moving forward seemed more natural than going back. She spoke to me for the second time when we arrived at a canned goods stand. She pointed to a jar of pickled peppers and asked, without looking directly at me, "Can you handle spicy food?" It was a simple question. Totally simple. But there was something about the way she asked casually, as if I were already someone whose opinion on spicy food held some value for her, that created a strange feeling in my chest. Not strong, just present. I can handle it, I said. She picked up the glass. We continued walking. The sun had risen high enough to warm our backs. The band was still playing somewhere behind us. I noticed she was walking in a specific way, not slowly out of laziness, but slowly because she was actually looking where she was. Her feet touched the uneven asphalt of the sidewalk attentively. I found myself matching my pace to hers without realizing it, and only noticed when she stopped at a stand and I stopped too, naturally, without questioning. She turned her face toward me with a half smile. She wasn't looking at me as if I were interesting. She was looking at me as if I were unexpected. As if I had shown up in her morning in a way she hadn't planned but wasn't rejecting either. Do you always do this? She asked. What? Help strangers. I could have said yes. That's who I am. I'm extroverted. I love people. That would have been truthful enough. Instead, something inside me spoke the more specific truth. Not usually. I don't know why it is today. She didn't answer. She just kept walking. And me. When she opened her bag, I knew it would take a few seconds because she put things away without a very rigid order. When she was about to ask a salesperson something, I noticed she breathed slightly beforehand, not out of nervousness, but out of preparation. Small rhythms, small patterns. The kind of thing you only learn from someone if you spend enough time really paying attention. And I was really paying attention. The problem with this is that the body knows before the mind consents. My mind was having a peaceful morning at a market, helping a woman with her shopping bags. My body was having a completely different morning. It was a small thing, but it was persistent. When she came closer to show me an olive oil label, look, it's from California, not Italy, but the production company is small. And he stood a few centimeters closer than necessary to show me a package, and I felt my breath do something strange. It didn't catch. It didn't quicken. It just hesitated. As if my system was being consulted about something and hadn't yet reached a conclusion. I looked at the label. It is good, I said, without having proven it. She bought two. The wind carried something from the side-cut flowers. Probably, and for a second the air between us had this mixed scent. Flowers and her perfume. Which I hadn't consciously noticed before, but which was suddenly very present. Not heavy, clean, with something woody underneath. I looked away towards the street. Do you live around here? She asked. Park Slope. It's about a 20-minute walk. I'm more upbeat, she said. Prospect Heights. None of us mentioned that we were neighbors, that we might have crossed paths before, or that the market was located right between the two areas. All those connections were there, ready to be mentioned. We didn't say any. We continued walking at the pace that had become ours without it having been planned, without it having been declared. And there was something about this shared rhythm that gave me a feeling I didn't quite know where to put. It wasn't exactly discomfort. It was more like, not a coffee shop, just an old cart with a man in a hat and an espresso machine that looked like it had traveled long enough to have stories of its own. There was a line of about 6 people. You want? Where are you going? She asked. And she was already leaving before I could answer, as if she knew I would want to. I wanted to. We stood in line side by side. The bags between us on the floor, hers and the one I was holding, acted as a minimal boundary, as proof that there was a practical reason for us to be there. But the line was narrow, and the space between us was less than it would be between strangers in a regular line. None of us adjusted the space. She ordered a double espresso with a little hot water. I ordered the same because I heard it and it sounded right. The man in the hat prepared it slowly, carefully, and there was something about that scene, the surrounding market, the leaves on the sidewalks, the October light, The smell of the coffee being made that seemed deliberately composed, as if someone had arranged the elements on purpose. But nobody had organized anything. It was just a Saturday morning. She paid before I could open my purse. It wasn't a gesture. She just swiped her card and received the 2 paper cups without comment. She handed me one. Our fingers didn't touch, but they were very close for a second. "Thanks," I said. She made a slight movement with her head. "The exchange is fair." We drank our coffee standing next to the cart. The street was busier now later. More people, the typical Saturday unfolding around us. And the two of us stood there drinking hot coffee from paper cups, staring ahead without any urgency whatsoever. She asked where I worked. I said graphic design, freelance, worked from home most of the time. She listened with the kind of attention that makes you want to keep talking. Not because she asked too many questions. Because when she asked something specific, not cool. "But do you choose which projects you accept, or do you take whatever comes your way?" I smiled involuntarily. "I try to choose," I said. "It doesn't always work out." "I know, yes," she replied. And there was something in those 2 words, not generic empathy, but recognition that created a familiarity that 2 hours in the market shouldn't have created yet. She finished her coffee. She looked at the bags on the floor. "I need to go drop this off at home before the cheese dies," she said with a small smile. It was the right moment. The cue was clear. The point where the morning naturally came to an end. "Of course," I said. "But none of us have picked up the bags yet." There were about 3 blocks between the market and her apartment. She mentioned this in passing. "Stay there," vaguely pointing north. And I picked up the bags from the ground before even thinking about whether I should, and we started walking. I knew at that moment that I had gone beyond the point of practical help. The bags were light enough for her. The route was short enough for her. I wasn't needed in the literal sense of the word, and she hadn't asked me to go. And I had gone. There's a kind of brutal integrity that happens when you're alone with your own thoughts long enough. You can't sustain the nice story, the comfortable explanation. You see what you're doing with an uncomfortable clarity. And what I was doing was prolonging something. I couldn't name what it was yet, but I knew I was prolonging it. The streets of Prospect Heights were quieter than the market. Taller trees, wider sidewalks, brownstone houses with stone staircases and flower pots with wilting flowers in early autumn. She knew that route like the back of her hand, turning without hesitation, stepping half a step onto an uneven sidewalk without looking down. I was paying attention to that, to the way she inhabited that place. "How long have you lived here?" I asked. 11 years, she said. 11 years old. She was 38. She'd mentioned it in passing earlier, in connection with something. I don't remember the context anymore. 11 years in that neighborhood. She'd arrived there at 27, which was a year older than I was now. I thought about it for a moment. The idea that there's a version of her who was exactly my age, who was still arriving at that place, who was still turning that corner for the first time. "Do you like it here?" I said. It wasn't a question. "I like," she confirmed. And then, after a silence that had the texture of consideration, "It's the place where I stopped feeling like I was just passing through." I heard that, and something inside me went very quiet, not out of sadness, out of recognition of absence. Because I still felt like I was just passing through in almost everything. In the apartment I rented month after month, in the projects I accepted without much conviction, in the Saturday mornings I spent searching for something nameless. She turned to me suddenly. She didn't stop, but turned her head, as if she had sensed the silence change in quality. "You are far away," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation, almost affectionate. "I was listening to you." "Yes," I replied, and it was true. But that wasn't all. What it all meant, I wasn't ready to say, even to myself yet. We both kept walking, and the street got narrower, and her apartment was getting closer, and I felt. She stopped at the top of the stairs and turned to me. I was one step below. That left us almost at the same height. Almost. She reached out to grab the bags. I handed her the bag. Our fingers touched this time, not accidentally, not intentionally, but as an inevitability of two people exchanging weight from one hand to the other. It was quick. It wasn't insignificant. Thanks, she said it, for the second time that morning. But this time the words sounded different. Slower. It was easy, I said. And it sounded idiotic as soon as it was finished. She smiled, not the idiotic smile I'd sounded like, but something I couldn't quite make out. There was something in her smile that was aware. As if she knew more than I did about what was happening on those steps. Perhaps she did know. She was 12 years older. Perhaps she had been on that step before, on the other side. What is your name? She asked. Maya. Renata said. Renata. I repeated it mentally. The name had weight. It had that quality of names that seemed to have been chosen for specific people. You can't imagine her being anything else. We remained silent for a moment. Not the uncomfortable silence that comes when two people have nothing left to say. The other kind. The silence that lingers when everything that could be said is in the air, but neither of us is saying it. I knew that she knew, and she knew that I knew that she knew. Nothing was happening. Absolutely nothing had happened. Two women in a market, a favor, coffee, 3 blocks. That was the objective story. That was all any outside observer would have seen. But what happened between two people is never the objective story. The wind blew a leaf, which landed on the stairs between us. Neither of us looked at it. You must have other things to do on Saturday, Renata said. It was an option. Offered kindly. A way for me to leave that wouldn't sound like rejection. That would sound like consideration. I could have accepted. It would have been the easiest thing to do. I said. And I stayed where I was. She looked at me for a second that lasted longer than a second. And then, she looked at the screen. Something passed across her face, not irritation, but reorientation. Like someone being called back to a life that was, for one morning, on standby. Sorry, she told me. And she answered. I went down a step, then another. Not out of politeness, out of a need to do something with my body while the situation rearranged itself around me. She was speaking in a low voice. Something about a time. Something about later. The conversation lasted maybe 40 seconds. When she hung up, I was already on the sidewalk. She looked down at me from the top of the stairs. Bags dangling from her arms. Phone still in her hand. I need to attend to a matter. She said, Of course, yes, I said immediately. Too easily. With the kind of ease that is in fact the opposite of what it seems. There was a pause. It was good, she said. And it wasn't a conclusion from the morning. It was something else. It was recognition. But of what exactly? None of us were saying aloud. It was good, yes, I agreed. Another silence. She was going to give me her number. I was expecting it not with calculated anticipation, but with the kind of feeling your body gets when it anticipates something logical. It was the natural conclusion. We were two people who had spent a morning together in a way that wasn't casual enough to simply be dismissed. But she didn't say anything else. And I didn't say anything else either. Because asking for her number would be admitting what the morning had been like. And neither of us had yet said aloud what the morning had been like. She made a movement with her head. Not exactly a goodbye, but a gesture of acknowledgement before leaving. I turned around and started walking. I counted to 15 before looking back. When I looked, the dark wooden door was closing. The frosted glass was still trembling slightly. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment that shouldn't have lasted so long. And then my feet went south, back to Park Slope. And the wind was a little colder than when I had left home in the morning, and my hands were empty. I don't know anything about her. I'm 26. She's 38. That wouldn't work. I didn't even ask for her number. She didn't ask for mine. Ready. I constructed this narrative on my way home, brick by brick, carefully. It stood for approximately 3 hours. After lunch, which I ate without being hungry and devoured, I opened my computer and tried to work on a project that was behind schedule. It stayed open for 2 hours. I produced perhaps one usable paragraph. The problem with interior constructions is that they require constant maintenance. You can't just put up the wall and walk away. You have to stay there, holding the bricks in place, because without continuous attention, the structure will collapse. I didn't have sustained attention. My attention was elsewhere. I was on a stone staircase in Prospect Heights. She was 11 years old when she lived in that neighborhood. It was in the question she asked, "Do you always do this?" And in my reply, "I don't know why today, yes." And in the way she had simply kept walking afterward, without making a big deal out of my response, but also without letting it go completely unnoticed. At 4 in the afternoon, I went for a run. Not because I wanted to run. I don't run regularly. I don't have that habit, but because I needed to get my body moving in a way that had an external logic. Running has an apparent purpose. You go somewhere. You come back. There's a beginning and an end. I accidentally walked down Washington Avenue. Or wanting to. I can't tell the difference anymore. The market was over. The street was normal. All the stalls dismantled. Just a few forgotten packages in the gutter. Nothing to see. Nothing to justify having gone that way. I kept running. I arrived home sweaty and with my lungs aching in a good way. I took a shower. I made tea. I sat on the sofa with my tea and stared out the window for an indefinite amount of time. It was a very typical Saturday in October in Brooklyn. Absolutely nothing had happened. I repeated this to myself with all the conviction I could muster. And then I went to bed earlier than I had reason to, because I didn't know what else to do. It appears on the edges of things. The following week, I worked. I delivered the overdue project, accepted 2 new ones. I had coffee with a friend on Tuesday. I went to the supermarket. I did laundry. I slept reasonably well. Everything went within the normal parameters of a week. But there was a different texture to things. Like when you change the angle of a lamp and the shadow falls differently in the same room, everything is the same, but the quality of the light has changed. I found myself looking at strangers on the subway in a way that wasn't my usual habit. Not looking for her. I knew I wasn't looking for her because I wouldn't recognize her in a hastily taken photo. I didn't have that kind of clear record of her yet. I was looking for something else. Her quality. The way she was in a place as if the place deserved attention. I thought of her in the middle of a video meeting on Thursday. The client was explaining the briefing and I was listening and taking notes. And suddenly, without warning, it came to me. The image of her hands holding the jar of pickles in the tent. That's all. The hands and the jar and the October light all around. I blinked and came back. But the fact that he went... I went to the market the following Saturday. This is the kind of thing I would tell myself I was doing out of habit because I like open-air markets because of the herbs at the stall before. I would have many reasons available. The real reason I didn't say out loud, she wasn't there. Of course she wasn't there. People don't stay in the same places to be found. Life doesn't work that way. I knew that before I went, and I went anyway, and she wasn't there. And I bought lavender and tomatoes and a small jar of honey and went home with everything in a cloth bag that I held with both arms against my chest. That night I stayed up longer than I should have and tried to reconstruct exactly what she had said before the phone rang. She had opened her mouth. I saw it so clearly that it seemed like a fabricated memory, but I knew it wasn't. She had opened her mouth and was about to say something. And I bought a new coat. Gray, heavier. I tried it on in the store in front of a mirror and stared at myself for longer than I needed to, with the strange feeling of seeing myself as someone from the outside would see me. I thought, this is the person who stood on the sidewalk counting to 15 before looking back. I kept the coat on. There's something that happens when you stop trying not to think about something. It's not that you start thinking more, it's that the thoughts become more honest. Less defensive. They come more clearly because they no longer need to escape through the back window. I started admitting small things to myself. That morning at the market was one of the best mornings I'd had in a long time. Not the most exciting, not the most dramatic, the one that had made me most present. Every detail of those 3 hours was clearer in my memory than most of the things I had intentionally done all year. That I knew nothing about her. In fact, nothing beyond the neighborhood, the double coffee, the age of 11, the hands. But what I did know had a quality, a consistency. Like when you read the first page of a book and you know not the plot, not the characters, but you know you're going to want to finish it. In the first week of November, as I was leaving a coffee shop on Vanderbilt, I saw a woman with her back to me on the sidewalk. Dark hair, dark coat. Walking at that specific pace, not slowly out of laziness, but slowly out of focus. My steps stopped. My heart did something that I'm not going to call anything yet because calling it something would be admitting more than I was ready to admit on the Vanderbilt sidewalk one November morning. The woman turned a corner and disappeared. It wasn't her. I couldn't confirm it for sure, but I knew it wasn't her. And what I felt, it wasn't relief. It wasn't exactly disappointment. It was confirmation of something that had been happening inside me for weeks. Something I had unconsciously nurtured every time I went to sleep thinking about that stone staircase. I had gone without the specific intention I'd had in previous weeks, or rather, I'd learned not to name that intention. I went because I like markets in the morning. I went because I needed things. I went. I saw her before she saw me. She was at a bread stall, her back partially to me, examining a baguette with the same attention I knew. A dark green coat I hadn't seen before. The same small earrings. My body knew before I decided anything. A kind of internal reorientation, not excitement, not exactly. More like when you've been holding your breath without knowing it and suddenly realize it and let it out. I could turn around. I still had time. I won't come. I approached without a plan. I stopped maybe 2 meters away. I stared at the loaves of bread in front of me without really seeing them. She turned around not to me, but to get something from her bag and saw me. A second passed, Mayash said. Not with performative surprise. With the quality of someone saying a name they recognize from memory, not from a file. Hey, I said. And it sounded so insufficient that I almost laughed. She didn't smile immediately. She looked at me first. With that attentive look I already knew, that kind of gaze that doesn't invade but also doesn't hold back. Your back said, I always come. That's true, I said. It had only been true since I'd met her. I know, she said. I saw you last week. The air slowly left my body. Why don't you? I was thinking, she said simply. He didn't explain what. I didn't ask. There were questions that, if asked, would require answers that would rearrange everything. And none of us were sure we wanted that rearrangement there, that morning. In that market with the smell of fresh bread and the cold November air wafting from the street. We stood side by side for a moment without speaking, and then she said, Did you have coffee? And I said no. And she made a slight movement with her head in the direction of the old cart. I went along. This time she didn't pay before I could open my purse. We each paid our own way. It was different. It was something else. More balanced. More honest. We stood there with our warm glasses in our hands, staring out onto the street. Renata, I said. Just the name. Just to see how it sounded out loud after weeks of it just sounding inside. She turned her face towards me. I know. She said it again. As if she knew what I was going to say before I even knew it myself. There was a sentence I'd been carrying around for weeks. An incomplete sentence without a clear destination. It was here now, somewhere between the coffee and the cold air and I. It was that the phrase, when I looked for it, when I went to find the exact words, was no longer there in phrase form. It had dissolved into something else. Into presence. Into being there beside her with hot coffee in my hands while the market functioned around us, and I knew her name and she knew mine, and she had seen me last week and had been thinking. Sometimes the truth doesn't need words to be told. Sometimes she just needs a second of eye contact that lasts a second longer than social settings require. And that's it. They both know and they don't know either. And that's enough for now. Enough for today, enough for this November chill that will eventually go away but is still here today. She took the last sip of her coffee and turned the cup between her fingers as if she were about to move. I'm not in a hurry today, she said. Not exactly for me, for the air. But I was in the air. I said, me either. And we stayed. Not for much longer. Maybe 40 minutes. We walked through the market together for the second time in a different way than the first. Less cautious, more filled with a silence that I could inhabit without needing to fill it. She showed me the cheese stall she'd been going to since the beginning. The vendor who knew her name. I bought lavender again because I always buy lavender, and she commented that dried lavender near a window lasts all winter if you let the air circulate. I kept that. When we arrived at the same corner as before, the point where the neighborhood split, where the south goes to Park Slope and the north goes to Prospect Heights, we naturally stopped. She opened her bag and took out a small piece of paper. She wrote something with a pen that was already in her hand, as if it had been planned, as if she had placed the pen there on purpose, as if thinking that was it, having a pen and paper ready for when the decision came. He gave it to me. I looked. The number. And below, in the same letter, when you're ready. I folded the paper and put it in the pocket of my gray coat. She turned to leave. And I kept looking at her back, her green coat, her hair, the rhythm I already knew, until she turned the corner. This time I didn't count to 15 before looking. This time I looked right away because I wanted to see. Because carefully storing things isn't the same as losing the courage to look at them while they're still there. She turned around. And I had the paper in my pocket. And the wind smelled of November. And I went home down the long street.